Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. It's a totally ordinary, completely beautiful sunlit morning. It's June 3rd, 1998, and hundreds of passengers are just, sipping their coffee, gazing out the windows, and enjoying this phenomenally smooth, high-speed journey from Munich to Hamburg. Everything feels perfectly normal, perfectly safe, but literally within minutes, this routine morning commute is going to violently transform into the deadliest high-speed rail accident in history. Today, we're unpacking the anatomy of the eschede train disaster. We're going to look really closely at the engineering, the overlooked warnings, and the absolutely devastating consequences of prioritizing comfort over fundamental physics. So the clock strikes 10:30 a.m. as the train pulls out of Hanover Station. Just 12 minutes into the journey, a man named George Dittman is sitting in coach number 1 with his family. And suddenly, boom! This incredibly aggressive, terrifying jolt completely rocks their compartment. Before they can even process the noise, a massive, jagged piece of solid steel violently pierces straight up through the floor of the train, ripping right between their seats. Think about that. Had that jagged metal been just an inch to the left or right, his family wouldn't have survived. George immediately rushes his wife and kids to the next compartment and frantically goes looking for the conductor. But what he doesn't know is that this nightmare, it is just beginning.
Okay, let's dive into this. How in the world did the absolute pride of German engineering, a vehicle that was widely considered to be literally the safest passenger train on the planet, how did it suddenly become a catastrophic death trap? To really grasp the disaster that unfolded that morning, we actually have to rewind a bit and look at the intense global pressure that created this machine in the first place.
Let's set the stage here. Back in the late 1950s, Japan stunned the world with their Shinkansen, the bullet train, right? It totally revolutionized travel. And soon after, France and Italy built their own high-speed rail networks. Well, Germany, not wanting to be left behind, launched its own highly ambitious project in the 1980s called the Intercity Express, or ICE. When these trains debuted, oh man, they were hailed as the ultimate future of travel. Beautiful aerodynamic designs, state-of-the-art computer systems, and just an unmatched level of passenger comfort. But, as we so often see in the history of engineering, the pursuit of absolute perfection usually hides a critical vulnerability. Now, the whole core of this disaster, it honestly comes down to a tiny, almost unbelievable metric, just 5 grams. The first generation of ICE trains that used what are called monoblock wheels. Basically, they're just a single solid piece of cast steel, and they were incredibly strong. But as those solid wheels wore down unevenly over time, it created a tiny weight imbalance. We are talking an imbalance of just 5 grams. Now, at slow speeds, you wouldn't notice a thing, but when a massive steel wheel is spinning at 250 kilometers per hour, that 5-gram difference creates an intense, rattling vibration that shoots throughout the whole train. It actually got so bad that passengers were complaining about their glasses and silverware violently clinking together in the dining car. So it was annoying for passengers, and, crucially, replacing entire solid wheels all the time was getting very, very expensive for the railway company.
So to fix this rattling silverware situation, engineers came up with a compromise. They shifted from the solid, reliable monoblock wheel to a brand new design called the resilient wheel. Instead of one solid chunk of metal, this new wheel was built in parts. You had an inner metal core, an outer metal rim, and sandwiched right between them a thick ring of rubber. And honestly, this rubber ring was brilliant at its intended job. It absorbed all those shocks and vibrations. The ride was incredibly smooth again. And hey, maintenance was cheaper because they only had to replace the outer metal rim when it wore down. But that rubber ring held a very dark secret. By absorbing the vibrations, it was completely masking the deadly metal fatigue that was silently building up inside the outer steel ring.
And here is where a massive, frankly staggering miscalculation happens. The engineers didn't actually design this resilient wheel specifically for high-speed rail. Nope, they literally borrowed the design directly from the city trams operating in Germany at the time. Now think about this. City trams operate at roughly, 30 kilometers per hour. ICE trains travel at 250 kilometers per hour. Executing this massive leap in operational stress without conducting rigorous high-speed testing was a fatal mistake. Executive leadership simply approved the design, and by 1992, these resilient wheels were completely retrofitted onto the entire high-speed fleet.
And this wasn't just some freak, unpredictable failure out of nowhere. There was a glaring timeline of ignored warnings. Back in 1992, a really prominent German research organization called the Fraunhofer Institute explicitly warned that using these resilient wheels on high-speed trains could be dangerous. Then, fast forward to 1997. The Hanover Tram Company, the exact people using this wheel design, discovered severe cracks in their own tram wheels. They immediately replaced them and even warned the National Railway Company, Deutsche Bahn. But because the ICE train's rubber rings were doing such a good job hiding the vibrations, the passenger complaints had completely vanished. So assuming everything was totally fine, the railway completely ignored the tram company's warning.
But the systemic failures didn't just stop at ignored external warnings, right? They plagued the daily maintenance routines too. Over time, that specific wheel that ended up rupturing under George Dittman's coach, it had actually been reported for flat spots a shocking 8 separate times. 8 times! Yet, it was never replaced. Furthermore, the maintenance crews actually had modern diagnostic machines capable of detecting internal metal cracks, but management claimed these machines just produced too many false alarms. So instead of using ultrasound technology, inspectors were literally sent out with simple handheld flashlights to visually check the wheels. I mean, come on, a flashlight cannot see microscopic fatigue fractures happening inside a metal ring that is compressing and expanding 500,000 times a day.
All right, let's bring ourselves right back to that frantic morning of June 3rd. George Dittman has finally found the conductor in Coach 3, and he's frantically explaining that a massive piece of steel has just ripped through the floor of Coach 1. But company policy states the conductor cannot pull the emergency brake until he visually inspects the damage himself. So the two men begin this long, tense walk from Coach 3 all the way up to Coach 1. Meanwhile, the train is still hurtling forward at 200 kilometers per hour. Underneath Coach 1, that broken metal outer rim of the wheel has peeled completely off and is actively dragging along the track. For 3 agonizing kilometers, the train is literally speeding toward disaster, completely unable to be stopped.
This right here tragically illustrates how a single, tiny point of failure can cascade into absolute catastrophe. As the train approaches the town of Eschede, it passes over a track junction. That dragging, broken wheel rim suddenly catches on the guide rail of the track switch and violently tears it straight from the ground. This instantly flips the switch right as the train is passing over it. The front locomotives and coaches 1 and 2 manage to stay on the main track, but coach 3 is suddenly violently yanked onto a parallel side track. The entire train twists. Coach 3 completely derails, slides sideways, and slams directly into a massive 300-ton concrete pillar that's supporting a road bridge above the tracks.
The impact takes out the pillar entirely, and the consequence is instantaneous. The entire road bridge literally collapses directly onto the rear half of the train. The sheer weight and force of 300 tons of falling concrete utterly pulverized coaches 5 and 6. To really grasp the horrifying scale of this impact, rescue workers later found that those 2 massive train cars had been crushed down to a height of just 6 inches. Let that sink in. 6 inches. Behind them, coaches 7 through 10, which were still moving at maximum speed, slammed into the rubble, folding up against each other, just like an accordion.
The aftermath was just unimaginable. Residents of the nearby town rushed out to help, and they were soon followed by over 1,000 professional rescue workers, military doctors, ambulances, you name it. But they immediately faced a grim and incredibly frustrating obstacle: the train's pressure-proof windows. Because these windows were designed to keep the cabin perfectly quiet and pressurized at high speeds, they were practically unbreakable. First responders literally couldn't get into the crushed cars without heavy machinery, which agonizingly delayed access to the trapped victims. In the end, 101 people lost their lives that day, and 88 more were severely injured. By sheer luck, those in the first 2 coaches, including George Dittman's family, actually survived. Obviously, a disaster of this scale shocked not just Germany, but high-speed rail operators worldwide, forcing an immediate, massive pivot in the industry. Every single high-speed train using resilient wheels was instantly grounded and reverted right back to the solid monoblock wheels. Yes, they require more maintenance, and yes, they're louder, but they don't shatter like that. And those vibrations, they act as an essential natural warning system. Furthermore, railway networks fundamentally changed their infrastructure. They started relocating overhead bridges away from vulnerable track switches. And finally, they mandated the installation of specifically designed breakable emergency windows to ensure rescue workers would never, ever be locked out of a crisis like that again. You know, we so often think of engineering as just, well, math and physics, but at its core, it's really about human choices. The eschede disaster remains a mandatory case study in engineering schools all around the world today, for good reason. It teaches us a haunting lesson that a tiny 5-gram vibration, an ignored warning from a local tram company, and a simple flashlight inspection can all combine to create a monumental tragedy. When we design the systems that carry millions of lives, we absolutely must remember that sacrificing durability for comfort carries the ultimate price. Definitely something to think about the next time you're enjoying a perfectly smooth commute, right?
Anyway, thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.